Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to our SimCap mid-year virtual technical meeting. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Alvaro Calle. I'm the DC Area Director this year for our local ITE section. And we've got 4 presentations today, and just want to quickly just turn it over to talk about our SimCap committee. Adam, feel free to just jump into if you like.
Yeah, I think George just got here as well, so he might.
Oh, okay. I'm sorry.
Yeah, go for it.
Did you call me? I'm sorry. Hey, thank you, everyone, Adam, and thank you to all the speakers and everyone who joined this meeting. So just want to take 1 minute to give you the background of the ITE SimCap. So it was created to improve the application and understanding of traffic simulation and the capacity analysis. So it is a pretty grassrooted organizational group, subgroup under IT, open to all peoples, to all professionals with interest in and experience in these areas. So it was founded in 2006, and WDC section ITE, we found our own SimCap committee back in 2009, and we are very proud that we are one of the 9 active SimCap chapters across North America, including US and Canada, with an active regular activities in the past 12 years. And in particular, I want to mention that we have been holding a joint annual SimCap meeting with Virginia site ITE at TRB in February each year for 4 times. Before COVID, we have consecutive 3 times. Then during COVID, we paused a little bit, and we resumed that last year. So we are about to start planning for the 5th one later this year for the upcoming joint meeting again. It was very well received meeting, and we have pretty large audience every year and become bigger and bigger. So anyone who is interested in presenting your work, your research, your study, or even you have any questions, we have an open discussion session as well, relevant to SimCap. And also we are trying to expand to data and also new technology. So we welcome you for any interesting participation presenting. I think that's it, Pablo. With that, I transit back to you for the formal presentation. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you, George. And then, yeah, I think with that, we'll get started.
All right. My name is Adam Nujumi-Anaskeheda. I have the pleasure of introducing our first speaker. Fabio Sasahara is an associate director at McTrans Center at the University of Florida, with extensive experience in applying and developing new HCM methods. At McTrans Center, he leads training programs on the Highway Capacity Manual and Highway Capacity software. Fabio is actively involved with ITE at section, district, and international levels. He's faculty advisor at the University of Florida Student Chapter and is also a graduate from the Leadership ITE class of 2022. He is also actively involved with the Highway Capacity and Quality of Service Committee at TRB, where he currently serves as the user liaison lead. Today, I'll be presenting on what's new in the Highway Capacity Manual 7th edition. Floor is yours, Fabio.
All right, thank you very much. My pleasure to be here. So let me share my screen, make sure everything is working fine. And you should be seeing the slides right now. Let me know if you have any issues. Again, a little bit about McTrans. We are a university-based center. Our main business is selling traffic analysis tools, mainly the highway capacity software. So we spend a lot of our time working on the highway capacity manual, and we spent the last 2 years implementing some of the new releases or the new features of the 7th edition that was released by TRB about a year ago, January 2022. So to get started, what has changed in the 7th edition? There were 5 major projects that contributed to this new scope. As you can see in the table, I'll be discussing a little bit about each one of them. starting with an NCHRP 17-87 that introduces some new pedestrian level service method and fixed some issues of the existing methods in the 6th edition. The second one, we have a FHWA project that develops some adjustment factors for CAVs. Third, I have a whole new chapter for two-lane highway analysis that completely replaced the method we had in the 6th edition. Fourth one is an FHWA project that develops some new guidelines for ATDM analysis for urban streets. It's mostly based on travel time reliability, not exactly a new method, but more some expanded guidance on what we can do with HCM methods. And the last one, another project to analyze corridors comprised of freeways and urban streets and how you analyze interactions between these two elements. To get started with our first main project, capacity factors for CAVs. The main idea is these methods were developed for long-term planning analysis, so especially target at agencies that want to have a ballpark estimate how much CAVs are going to add capacity to their road systems in the next couple of decades. And the main idea of all these methods is that it has only one single input, which is the market penetration rate, or in other words, what's the percentage of CAVs in the traffic stream. And since we're talking about CAVs, it's always good to provide a definition of CAV in the context of the HCM. Basically, we're talking about vehicles that can communicate vehicle to vehicle and also vehicle to the infrastructure. It assumes all vehicles have CACC, or cooperative adaptive cruise control abilities, so they can operate under platoons with shorter headways. So that's the basis of all the methods. They were developed based on micro simulation. And technically speaking, if you're familiar with the SAE definitions of CAVs, we're talking about automation levels 4 or 5 when vehicles can actually take control of the driving task without the need of a human driver. How it works in the HCM context, we have 3 different elements covered: freeways, roundabout, and signals. Starting with freeways. Main idea is that we use capacity adjustment factor, or CAF, that increases capacity. So first of all, there is no factor that reduces capacity even at low market penetration rates. Currently, it addresses basic, merge, diverge, and weaving segments. As we mentioned, it's developed for planning level applications, so it has some limitations. For example, it cannot address oversaturated conditions or CAV-only lanes or truck platooning. So, for example, these factors, they apply to the entire traffic across the board. You cannot just focus on trucks, even though there are some conversations that truck CAVs may hit the road a lot earlier. How it works, you apply a certain adjustment factor based on the proportion of CAVs and what is the base capacity. So base capacity typically ranges between 2,400 to 1,800. And then each one of these, as you can see in the table, have different adjustment factors. There are translated into the graph. That should be easy to understand. But basically, at 100% CAV environment, all of these configurations should convert to a capacity around 3,200 vehicle passenger cars per hour per lane, which is what this research is suggesting us. We have a similar adjustment for signals. Main idea here is that we adjust the saturation flow rate, more specifically the base saturation flow rate. It can address protected and permitted phases. And what research suggests here is that at 100% CAVs, you may expect to achieve a base saturation flow rate of 2,900 passenger cars per hour per lane, as opposed to the regular 1,900 that we currently use in our analysis. Again, that's a planning level tool. It does not address everything. So interactions with pedestrians and other modes and what's happening in driveways or access points, that adds a lot of complexity to the methods, not something that can also be addressed. So again, be aware of the limitations of the methods. And the last one on CAVs is roundabouts. So the basic model of roundabouts, it analyzes capacity as function of the circulating flow inside the roundabout. So The effects of CRVs, they're plotted on graphs. There are 4 different capacity configurations depending on if you have 1 or 2 lanes entering or 1 or 2 lanes circulating inside. But as you can see here, if you're on the free flow side, let's say the 1-in-1, the first graph to the left, your capacity goes from 1400 to 1800 and something. If you're on close to the saturation side, it goes from, let's say, 200 to a little bit less than 400. So proportionately, capacity gains are higher on the congested side, but in absolute numbers, capacity gains are higher on the free flow side. Okay. The second method I want to discuss about here is 2-lane highways, which completely replace the methods that we had before. So we're going to compare a little bit what we had in the 6th, 7th edition. First of all, now we have the ability to do facility analysis as we currently do freeways. So we can model facilities with multiple segments that can be, as you can see here in the bottom, a passing zone when passing is allowed, passing constraint when it's not allowed, and a passing lane when you add a second lane to the same direction of travel. We couldn't do that in the 6th edition. Another new feature is that we can also break segments into sub-segments. Now this methodology is sensitive to horizontal alignment. So if you model horizontal curves, that gives you a better estimate of speeds. And the second row in the column here, if you're familiar with the 6th edition, you may be familiar with this highway classification, class 1, 2, and 3. That depends on the class highway purpose. Let's say class 1 is about intercity routes with longer distances, higher flows. Class 2 is more scenic routes, and class 3 is about some rural locations when have a mix of local and through traffic for a little bit of development. This classification was dropped in the 7th edition, so we don't have to worry about that anymore. And going to the next slide, moving on the table, we have some new performance measures. So again, in the 6th edition, we had 3 measures, travel speed, percent time spent following, and percent of free flow speed. These last 2 were dropped. We still have speed on the 7th edition, but now we have percent followers and follower density, 2 new measures. And just to define a follower in that context, it's any vehicle following the next one with a headway shorter than 2.5 seconds, which means that's the threshold where HCM assumes a vehicle is having the speed constrained by the next vehicle in a platoon. No change was really done to capacity. Research didn't find any evidence that capacity should change, so still kept at 1700. The only thing that was added here in the 7th edition is that passing lanes have a variable capacity, which depends on heavy vehicle percentages and grade. At the bottom here, you can see a comparison of the level of service framework between 6 and 7. On the 6th edition, it depended on what class you were analyzing. So there were different service measures, could be travel speed, percent time spent following, percent of free flow speed, or a combination. Now we have a single service measure, follower density, that applies to every single highway. Only thing to be aware here is that there are different criteria based on posted speed limit, more than 50 or less than 50 miles per hour. Okay. The third method we'll be talking about here is some updates or upgrades to the pedestrian level of service. And the main change here is on the two-way stop control. All the other methods have just minor changes to the methodology. So focusing on two-way stop control, we can also, again, compare HCM6, HCM7. In the previous release, the level of service was based on pedestrian delay, which is measured in seconds per pedestrian. We have a small table that we could address crosswalk treatments, which was expanded in the 7th edition. So you can see a larger table here on the right side. What has changed in the 7th edition? We have a new level of service measure, which is called percent of dissatisfied pedestrians. We're going to see that in a moment. The vehicular AADT is also now an input, so pedestrian level of service also sensitive to that. And the list of crosswalk treatments is also expanded. The idea of this table is that they list a certain yield rate or how compliant are drivers yielding to pedestrians. In theory, it should be 100%, but we know that's not what happens in the real world. So the HCM suggests some average rates for different treatments like crosswalks or flashing beacons, hawk signs, and some others, as you can see in the table here. This table compares the level of service criteria. So 6th edition, as we have discussed, based only on pedestrian delay. Anything higher than 45 seconds gives me a level of service F. 7th edition, now we're talking about dissatisfied pedestrians. The threshold for level of service F is now more than 50%, which is based on a series of inputs, including delay, but some other that reflect more comfort and safety measures. And finally, we have this new network method, which was developed as a whole new chapter 38. So that adds some new capabilities to the highway capacity manual. The main idea is if you're analyzing a trip, let's say from point A to point B, how can you do that using the HCM? This trip, for example, goes through different facilities, urban streets, interchanges, a couple of freeway segments, and then streets again. And you would face a lot of limitations in this HCM6 methods. For example, what happens if you have a queue backing up or queue spill back between the freeway and the urban street? Or how can you convert everything to travel time? And these are some of the limitations that this new method has overcome. For example, let's say if you look at the left here, you have this network with a freeway facility and a couple of cross streets. If you want to analyze a trip from point D to point H here, so you would drive through this urban street, take a couple of freeway segments, and then take the off-ramp, and then again go to another urban street. You would analyze all of this separately. So one urban street, then one facility, and then one urban street. And as we mentioned, some of the new things that we can do with this method, it converts everything to travel time automatically. So you have an travel time for the entire OD. So this methodology is very OD oriented. We can analyze freeway street interactions or queues per back, which is actually the majority of the bulk of this new methodology. But we can also address ramp travel time, which is something that we didn't have before. And also this methodology is sensitive to freeway lane selection. Now we can do an OD analysis. Different freeway lanes, they have different speeds, different flows, different capacities. So that can significantly affect the travel time through a certain set of freeway segments, depending again on the OD, where the driver is entering the freeway and where the driver is leaving the freeway. As we mentioned, the bulk of this methodology is the interaction between freeways and streets. So what we can do is we can analyze queues per back between freeways and streets, starting with on-ramps. So for on-ramps, queues per back may happen first when you have a bottleneck, which can happen at point A, B, or C. A being a congested merge when vehicles cannot enter. B could be the presence of a RAM meter that can also be addressed here. And C, although not very common, but the entrance of the ramp roadway can also be a bottleneck. And the second condition for us to have a bottleneck, according to this methodology, is the queue storage or the length of the on-ramp must also be insufficient. So the queue length over the 15 minutes analysis should exceed the overall queue storage. When you have these two, then we have a queue spillback, and then this method has the tools to analyze what is the effect of queue spillback in the operations of the upstream intersection and the urban corridor. We have something similar to off-ramps. The idea is the same. We can also compute the queue lengths from the off-ramp terminal, and then we can check if they extend all the way to the off-ramp and all the way to the freeway. Another input that's also required from the user, a new thing that research has found, is that there's something called queue spillback regime, which means Does the queue extend through one or two freeway lanes? Research has found that this is site-specific, so if queue back occurs, it's always happens in one lane or two lanes. So it depends a lot on the local geometry. Let's say if you have an option lane or not, or driver behavior, if you have one or two lanes, and this new HCM chapter provides some guidance for the user to tell the software, the methodology, if queue happens in one or two freeway lanes. And with that, I'm done with this presentation. It's very summarized, just to fit this meeting today, but I'll be glad to take any questions at the end.
If anyone does have questions, feel free to add them in the chat or ask them. I had one question. It was neat on the network graphic to see the streets of Gainesville. I'm a alumnus of University of Florida, so that was cool. For this method of combining different facilities, I think you had a note about the input data is largely similar. Is there any data that you need specifically for this method that you wouldn't already need for either the freeway or street facility analysis?
Yeah, very good question. So this methodology was developed to minimize the need of new inputs. So if you're analyzing a freeway and an urban street, so everything that you need to model these two separately, they will still be inputs. So the methodology consists a lot in connecting the dots between these two. But there are some new inputs which they are listed here, especially on the interaction between streets and freeways. If you have a RAM meter, that's something that can be entered, but also the length, the queue length storage is also something that we didn't account for, which basically is what is the length of the on-ramp, so from the merge point into the entrance, and of course the number of lanes that are available. So that's similar to the queue storage that we usually enter in our signal analysis. So you have to measure the turn lane pocket. So same principle, we enter the length here, and that methodology will compute if the queue exceeds the available storage length or not. The same idea applies to off-ramp. And again, another new input is this queue spillback regime. So should you expect the queue to go through one or two freeway lanes from the off-ramp based on local condition, especially geometry?
Great, thank you. Yeah, and one more question that was in the chat. Is the method of combining facilities in slide 16, does it yield an average travel time? Is there a metric of dispersion associated, such as standard error of the estimate or standard deviation? In other words, is there any guidance about reliability of the resulting travel time in the new HCM?
Yeah, that's a good question. So this methodology, it didn't really cover a lot about reliability, which is another chapter in HCM that we can analyze longer periods, and then we can measure different statistical measures of dispersion, median, different percentiles. One of the challenges of applying reliability to this methodology here is that the HCM has some structural differences on how reliability is computed for freeways and urban streets. So for freeways, every single day of analysis is one scenario, where in urban streets, every 15-minute period is one scenario. So that creates a little bit of a challenge, which wasn't discussed in this method. So that's an opportunity for new research. So that could be done with some adjustments, but not something that can be easily done right now. So in short, my answer would be it's designed for peak hour analysis, not for longer analysis, but it can something that can be done in the future with some adjustments. So something still to be researched.
Great, thank you. And I really appreciate the presentation. I'll hand it off to Alvaro for our next presenter.
All right, thank you.
Awesome. Thank you very much for the presentation, and thank you, Adam. All right, so we'll be moving on to our next presentation, titled Optimization, Modeling, and Assessment of Transportation Systems. I have the privilege of introducing my graduate school advisor back in the day, Dr. Hesham Rakha. Professor Rakha conducts regional research in multimodal large-scale transportation system optimization, modeling, and assessment. His innovative research reduces traffic congestion, reduces transportation energy consumption and greenhouse gas emissions, and enhances vehicle safety. His research includes the modeling of human travel and driving behavior, optimization of the longitudinal and lateral motion of various ground transportation modes, development of optimum network control strategies, and modeling the interdependencies of communication and transportation systems. Professor Rakha is a fellow of IEEE, AACE, AAIA, and the Canadian Academy of Engineering. The floor is yours, Dr. Rakha.
Thank you very much, Alvaro, for the introduction, and nice to see you after, I guess, a couple of years. I don't know, when did you graduate? Was it
2016? It's been a while.
2016? Wow, so time flies. Yeah.
Yeah.
Is it? Can you see my slides on the screen?
Yes. Yep.
Okay.
You're good.
How do I put it in? I guess is it turn on speaker mode?
It looks like it's fine now. If you're able to control your slides, then we can see it perfectly and hear you well.
Okay. Okay. So, of course, this presentation that I'm presenting is a work of many people who are involved in it, students, researchers, and so forth. I'm going to go over, I guess, a number of projects. How much time do I have, Alvaro?
20 minutes.
20 minutes. Okay, so if you could give me a warning, I guess when there are 5 minutes remaining, I'll make sure that I finish on time.
Definitely.
Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah. So what I'm going to go over is a couple of projects that we've worked on that tie into this theme of optimization, modeling, and assessment of transportation systems. The first project that I'm going to be covering is a project that we did for the DOE, the Department of Energy, ARPA-E, actually the DEER program, and basically it involved developing a controller that had an upper level. So we called it the Eco Cooperative Automated Control System. At the upper level, we have a router that routes vehicles in some optimum way. And in this case, our objective was to try and minimize the energy/fuel consumption of these vehicles. And then we also have a strategic speed controller that basically is identifying congestion in certain regions in a city. And then it's controlling the speed of vehicles entering those regions. And in doing so, it is controlling the flow entering those regions in order to disperse that congestion. And then there are two lower level controllers. One optimizes the vehicle speeds. I'm not sure if you can see my mouse here. Can you see my mouse or no? Let's see if I can see.
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. Okay. So at the one level, which is the EcoCACI, it optimizes the trajectories of vehicles in the vicinity of signalized intersections. In the EcoCACU, it's looking at uncontrolled roadways, so it's freeways, where we're trying to optimize the vehicle trajectories by platooning vehicles and driving them in fuel-efficient ways on freeways. With regards to our router, basically, we developed this unique router where whenever a vehicle traverses a roadway segment, similar to what Google does. So if you are using Google Maps, whenever you traverse a segment, you provide information to Google that they can use it for other vehicles who are planning to use that same route in the future. But rather than just sending one piece of information, which is the travel time, we send 8 pieces of information, 8 variables. And those 8 variables allow us to compute the energy consumption of any vehicle. So basically, those 8 variables are fused with data that we receive from other vehicles, similar to what Google Maps does. And then we send it back to the vehicle. The vehicle can then, based on its powertrain, so if I'm driving an electric car, using those 8 variables and the parameters of my car, I'm going to come up with the optimum route for an electric vehicle. if I'm driving a gasoline vehicle, I'm going to come up with a totally different route, which is the optimum route for a gasoline vehicle. So using this vehicle agnostic approach, we are able to develop vehicle-specific optimum routings that will minimize, in this case, the vehicle energy consumption. And then we implemented this in our in-house traffic simulation software integration, and we tested it on downtown Los Angeles. We modeled the downtown Los Angeles, 1 hour of the downtown Los Angeles, which is 145,000 vehicles. And we tested this, and this reference here is the reference to the paper that we wrote on this about this work. One of the things that we did find when we did this work was that if you're trying to minimize the energy consumption of electric vehicles, it is extremely conflicting with the objective of minimizing the travel times. And the reason for that is electric vehicles are more efficient at lower speeds. So their optimum speed is around 15 miles an hour. And they're more optimum in stop and go conditions, because when you're braking your electric vehicle, you regenerate energy that gets sent back from the wheel back to the battery, and you recharge your battery. And so stop and go conditions are actually better for electric vehicles in terms of energy consumption than high speed driving. And so then the next step we did is we looked at where you could try and come up with some combination of minimizing your travel time, but at the same time minimizing your energy, in order to come up with ways that would minimize your energy but have as minimum impact on increasing your travel times. Now, this also happens with gasoline vehicles, but it's much less pronounced, because the optimum speed of a gasoline vehicle is around 55 miles an hour. So it's better on a freeway, but if you go traveling at 70 miles an hour, then you get less efficient in your fuel consumption, but you'll be more efficient in your travel time. And so we were looking at those kind of multi-objective routings. With regards to the strategic speed control, we use what is known in the literature as either the macroscopic fundamental diagram or the network fundamental diagram, where you identify a fundamental diagram for a section of roadway. So let's say it's downtown Washington, D.C. And given that you have that fundamental diagram, which is shown here in the graph, you're trying to make sure that you don't get into this red area, which is the congested region. So the x-axis is density and the y-axis is flow, and you want to keep the flow at the nose of your fundamental diagram. So basically, when we're in the yellow region, we start controlling the amount of traffic entering into downtown Washington, D.C. in order to prevent it from reaching the red region, which is the red region means that you're just basically in a parking lot in downtown Washington. And so the way we can do that is either we can route vehicles away from downtown Washington, D.C., or we can be controlling the speeds of vehicles entering at specific points into this region, this congested, or this region that will be turning into congestion, in order to delay the onset of congestion or prevent the onset of congestion. And these papers describe the approach that we developed. We also developed some platooning algorithms that we tested. This is the downtown Los Angeles network. The red segments here are the freeways, where we implemented our speed harmonization and our platooning, and we showed benefits of that. I'm going to skip these, given that we don't have too much time. Another work that we did was how do we optimize, and let's see if I can okay, yeah. So basically, in this slide here, I show on the x-axis time, the y-axis position, and we have a traffic signal. The red trajectories are trajectories of drivers who are uninformed. They're approaching a traffic signal that is red. They come to a complete stop, and then when it turns green, they accelerate. Now, if we had connected vehicles, we could assume that basically through this connectivity, the traffic signal controller could share with the vehicles the SPAT, which is signal phasing and timing information. Using the SPAT information, we can try to optimize the vehicle trajectories in order to, let's say the SPAT information tells me that the traffic signal is red, but it's going to be changing to green in 15 seconds in the future. And so my objective is to delay this vehicle by 15 seconds so that when it arrives at the traffic signal, it turns green, but in a fuel efficient way. And in a fuel efficient way, typically that means that I'm trying to have its speed as high as possible when that traffic signal turns green, so that I minimize the amount of acceleration that the vehicle needs to do downstream of the traffic signal. And so we've developed some algorithms, which is we call it EcoCACI, or in the literature they also call it GLOSA, but whatever you want to call it, it's basically optimizing the vehicle trajectories in order to minimize their fuel consumption. One of the things that we found when we implemented this in our traffic simulation software, on the figure to the left, this is for a single lane approach. And on the x-axis, we have the level of market penetration of these connected automated vehicles. On the y-axis, we have the savings in fuel. The red line is if we just provide the SPAT information without trying to predict the queue lengths. The green line is if we, in addition to using the SPAT information, we actually predict how long the queue is, and we predict where the backward recovery shockwave will be in order to optimize the vehicle trajectory. You can see for the single lane approach that we always get positive benefits, and those benefits increase as the level of market penetration of those connected automated vehicles increases. Now on the graph to the right here, this is a two-lane approach. And this is something we observed also in the speed harmonization, that what happens is for low levels of market penetration, the system actually causes a negative impact because what happens is the drivers that are not connected, automated, they see these cars slowing down too early, and these aggressive drivers then will overtake these cars, cut in front of them, and they cause more turbulence in the traffic flow that actually causes disbenefits. And what we found here, that for the EcoCACC system here, that we needed a level of market penetration of 25% in order to start to see positive benefits on the system. Now, once we passed that 25% level of market penetration, the benefits actually increased to similar benefits that we got for the single lane approach. We also implemented this in a real car. We ran test subjects. We had 32 test subjects that we ran. The first scenario was an uninformed scenario. So you're just driving your car, you're approaching a traffic light that can be red or green, and we just look at your behavior. Scenario 2 was we provide on the screen a countdown indicator. So basically, you have some connectivity to the traffic signal controller, but you're just displaying a countdown information to the driver. So basically, it tells the driver the traffic signal will turn green in 15 seconds, and then 14 seconds, 13 seconds, and so forth. And we look at how the driver behaves. In scenario 3, we have a connected vehicle without automation. So basically, what we have is the vehicle receives SPAT information. We have our algorithm running on the vehicle. It computes the optimum speed at that instant T. We actually display to the vehicle, rather than displaying it as a visual display, we actually have an auditory one, because we found that the visual display was very distracting to the driver. And so every 2 seconds we would update. So it would tell you, for example, you should be driving at 35 miles an hour. And then the next 2 seconds, it tells you should drive at 30 miles an hour, and so forth. And then in scenario 4, we have a connected automated vehicle where not only are we receiving the SPAT information, but we're also controlling the movement, the longitudinal movement of that vehicle from 250 meters upstream of the traffic signal to 180 meters downstream of the traffic signal. And we tested this on our smart road here at Virginia Tech, which is a controlled facility. So this is the only vehicle on the facility. We're not interacting with other vehicles, as was the case that we did in the simulations. And this graph here shows you a sample run for one of those drivers. So the blue line here shows you the uninformed driver. They come to a complete stop. They stop for about 8 seconds and then they accelerate. The green line shows you the trajectory of the vehicle, of the driver and the vehicle when they receive the countdown information. So the countdown information does help a bit. It reduces the time you're stopped by maybe 2 to 3 seconds, but you still come to complete stop. And then the yellow one is when our algorithm is running on the vehicle and it's giving the driver a recommended speed. The driver tries to follow that speed, so you find these dips every so often when the driver is trying to control the speed. Those speeds are updated in real time, depending. So if the driver doesn't follow the speed as we told them, it will recompute an optimum speed from that point onwards. And then the red trajectory is the trajectory of the vehicle when it is not only connected, but it's level 2 automated. And so you can see a smooth trajectory of that car. And what we found in this study is that we could get on average, 39% reduction in the fuel consumption. These are gasoline vehicles, and a 9% reduction in delay. Although delay was not our objective, we actually did manage to achieve savings in delay. If you just had a connected vehicle without automation, the savings in fuel consumption were reduced from 39% to 13% relative to the base case uninformed driving scenario. So that's
5-minute warning, Dr. Rakha.
Okay, thank you. So the next one I'm going to talk about is a project that we had called Transnet that we did for RPE. But basically this project was, we had to select an area that had more than 3 million travelers. And the objective was we needed to target 10% of the population of those travelers and come up with more energy efficient travel recommendations and see what the benefits of those recommendations would be at the system level. We worked with the Palo Alto Research Center. They had an app called GoLA that would basically compute an optimum route from point A to point B that is multimodal. So for example, it could tell you ride an Uber from your home to this subway station, take the subway, get off at this station, take a ride share from this location to this location, drop it off here, and then walk the remainder of your trip. And you would pay once. A portion of that payment would go to the subway system, a portion would go to Uber, and so forth. And given that we couldn't test this in reality, we used our integration microscopic simulation software to run a simulation of the greater Los Angeles area. So this is the network, and the entire study can be, this 2.5 year study can be summarized in one sentence. And that's the one here, that basically after these 2.5 years of research and developing and so forth, if we targeted 10% of the population with information, 55% of those 10% accepted our recommendation. So we were controlling in total 5.5% of the total population. By doing that, we got a 4% reduction in energy consumption, fuel consumption, a 20% reduction in total delay. Of course, to do this, we had to develop different modeling tools around the integration. So we had a simulation coordinator that would track the traveler across the different modes of transportation. We developed modeling of the rail system, the bikes and pedestrians. And we also developed a mesoscopic simulation where we would model the local streets mesoscopically. And our intention was to get this to run in real time. So we were able to do so, running these 3+ million travelers at real time and microscopic level. So we're tracking every person individually. One of the things that we did look at was what would be the upper bounds of these savings, and this we observed in COVID when we had the lockdowns. So we said if we could tell 10% of the people to just work from home, what would the benefits be? And we found a 9% reduction in energy consumption for the AM and PM peaks, and a 30% reduction in delays in the greater Los Angeles area. What am I doing now for time here? Can I present one more slide?
Yeah, that's fine.
Okay, so Another project that we're just finishing, which is for RPE, which is looking at the decarbonization of the rail freight system in the US. I'm going to jump to the final slide, but I'm not sure if you can see the numbers here. But basically what we developed a simulation tool called NetTrainSim that models the freight system, and we modeled the entire US freight system, and then we computed, we did some validation. So for our simulations, we got close to 3 million tons of diesel fuel consumed per year, which is consistent with what is reported in the literature. We showed that by switching to hydrogen fuel cell, we could save around 16% in the energy consumption. By making these trains diesel/hybrid, electric hybrid, we could get a saving of around 6%. That's making sure that the state of charge at the end of our trips are within 1% of the state of charge at the beginning of the trips. And we also looked at battery electric. So if we could make these trains battery electric trains, we would get savings of around 60%. And we also looked at maybe pulling the electrification from the grid directly, and that gave us savings of around 65%. We also looked with NC State how this would affect the grid system. So by different regions, how much electricity will we be pulling away from the grid, and would the grid be able to sustain the demands of electricity that we need in order to run these systems? I think I'll end it here and then open the floor to any questions, if there are any questions.
Awesome. Thank you very much, Dr. Rakha. Yeah, great to hear about your recent work. Yeah, if there's any questions, feel free to put it in the chat now. And then Dr. Rakha, if you don't mind too, if there's more that come up later, feel free to answer that in the chat as well. But we got one just now, and it's what were the computation power requirement for the 3M population microsimulation modeling? Is that real-time simulation?
We were running it at the speed of real time on a server, and I don't know exactly I guess the power of that server, but what we did, maybe I'll go back here to my slides here, in order to achieve this speed that we wanted to. On the right here, you can see blue links and red links. The blue links were modeled microscopically, so we're tracking vehicles every decisecond, computing their speeds and accelerations, and we have a vehicle dynamics model that looks at the aerodynamic, rolling, grade resistance forces on the vehicles. The red links are mesoscopic, so basically when you enter a link, based on the density of traffic on the link, we predict when you're going to be arriving at the end of the link, and then we look, once that time reaches where you're allowed to leave the link, we just check whether the traffic signal is red or green, and if it's red, then we still hold you in a queue, and if it's green, we allow you to proceed through the vehicle. Also, in order to speed it up, we divided the network into 5 subnetworks, and we ran each subnetwork on one CPU. And so basically, these were running on 5 CPUs. We had a simulation coordinator that would basically make sure that, like, every second we resync all these subnetworks, and then we move on to the next second and so forth. But we finally managed to get this to run in real time, at real time speed, I guess. Yes.
Awesome. Yeah, thank you for the presentation, Dr. Rakha. Alrighty, with that, so let's move on to our next presentation. So the next one is titled The Utilization of Spatiotemporal Shockwave Dissipation at the Capacity State to Estimate Traffic Volume at Signalized Intersections. This will be presented by my coworker, Majeed Algomaiah. Majeed received his BS in Civil Engineering from Queensland University of Technology in Brisbane, Australia, followed by MS and PhD degrees in Transportation Engineering from the University of Louisville, Kentucky. He is currently a transportation consultant at VHB. His research interests focus on the applications of connected and autonomous vehicles in highways and intersections. Majeed aims to help improve the transportation network through innovative solutions. He believes in the role of technology and big data in enhancing the sustainability in transportation engineering. With that, go ahead, Majeed.
All right. Do you see my screen?
Yes, you're good.
Great. Thanks so much for having me. So today I would like to talk about my research about simply using the capacity state of shockwave profile in order to estimate the traffic volumes at signalized intersections. So in this research, so we are trying to tackle a problem. So we all know that in order to optimize traffic signal timing, we do need traffic volume data. And also in the future, to improve the connected vehicles applications, we also require real-time information of traffic volume and queue length data. So here, right now, what we do for traffic volume data collection, the existing methods are either the manual method, which is basically traffic counting by hand or by devices, or using something automated more like video cameras and other automated ways. However, the problem is that those automated methods, they are more expensive to install and also to maintain. So that's why now the new technology in this area is to use trajectory data. For those who are not familiar with the area, what do we mean here by trajectory data? Is simply the time and location in terms of GPS points and time of the data. And how can we present it? We simply present it in the time and space diagram, which is the fundamental diagram, and then the intervals of the trajectory data is every 0.1 second or 3 seconds, depending on the source of the data. So what is available here as a source? We have prop vehicles, which is our floating cars, and it's simply there are many vendors that they use or they sell this kind of data, and the most recent one is using connected vehicle data. So this is the more or the most recent way of using trajectory data, which is from different also vendors and directly from some sources. So with this kind of data, we can simply estimate the traffic volumes. In practice, actually, right now there is a big company called Streetlight Data. I'm sure some of you are familiar with it, and also at VHP we introduced Intersect, which is it's the same thing to use trajectory data to estimate traffic volume. So what is the challenge in this area? Actually, one of the biggest challenge is the low market penetration rate. What do you mean by market penetration rate? For those who are not familiar, is the number of vehicles that represent the data. For example, in a traffic flow like this one here, probably there are only 2 vehicles that's connected vehicles, or the vehicles that we have trajectory data for. Right now, connected vehicles, it's expected to have 5 to 15% of the traffic flow by 2024. By 2027, probably it will reach 17%, which is something we are not very sure about. So what is the research area? Our research area is simply the estimation of queue length and traffic volume based on connected vehicle trajectory data, which represent only a low percentage of the entire traffic flow. So here, the research gap we are trying to tackle is that the previous models, they lack independency as they require more input parameters from the intersection. And also they require higher market penetration rate. Also, all previous models, they don't consider all the vehicle classifications. In other words, if you see here my the mouse here is to the left, there is 2 types of let's say vehicle classifications. It's the queued vehicles and non-queued vehicles. In our research, we rather introduce something called slowed down vehicles. So we believe that the slowed down vehicles carry so much information that we can use in the model to estimate the traffic volume data. So what is the objective of our research is to establish relationship between the slowed down vehicles and the last queued vehicle, and then utilize only prior data set and deep learning techniques to identify the last queued vehicle. And therefore, if we estimate the last queued vehicle, we can know the queue length. And from the queue length, we can also know the traffic volume, which is the most important thing. So here is our methodology that we use. Simply, we had to use first a prior data set from that intersection. Then we applied deep learning models, and here we relied on the shockwave theory to find two different models. One of them called speed distribution, and the other one is called stop bar speed model. And then by getting those two models, we can use the real-time data from that intersection to put it in the model so we can get the queue length and finally the traffic volume. So let me just recap about this time-space diagram here. As you can see here in red, this is a vehicle that actually made a stop at the traffic signal, while this one in green, it didn't stop at all. Here is the shockwave profile. When many cars started to stop, we create this shockwave got created, and then after that, it get dissipated. So this is the dissipation shockwave in green, and the red is the forming shockwave. So what we did here is we wanted to look at the interactions between vehicles in the capacity state. So here we have three different states. A, which is the free flow state, and then B, which is the jam state, and C is the capacity state. In the free flow state, simply the vehicles drive with the speed limit, and then in the jam state, when they made a stop at the intersection or slow down, and then C, when it's green already, and then they started to move, which is the dissipation of the shockwave. So if you can see here in the left, this is from the queued vehicles with 100% market penetration rate. So we simulated the data and we got all the trajectory data, and then we plot the figure. Then what we did here, we got the only 10% of the data. So when we got only 10% of the data, as you can see, we could see the patterns of the shockwave profile. Here is the dissipation slope, and it's presented here, which we're gonna use in our model to estimate the traffic volume later on. So let's talk a little bit about the interaction between vehicles. Here, C is the capacity state again, which is when vehicles started to move after receiving the green light. And here in yellow, it's the slowed down vehicles. So the slowed down vehicles, they have to slow down and join the queue by slowing down, then speeding up. And here, this area is called the speed distribution. And this is one of the biggest models that we used in our method to estimate the traffic volume. So we believe that this information, the information of those vehicles is very, very important as they interact with the queued vehicle in the capacity state. And therefore, that will make it easy for us to come up with a better traffic volume estimation model. So in terms of experiment, we did two simulation experiments for estimating the queue length and the traffic volume. And we used Vism as a simulation model. And the power of simulation here is that it's hard to get sometimes some sort of data to do big research because we will have many variables to test while there are limited data. While in macro simulation environment like Vism, we can get as many data as we want to test. Also, there is an important factor, which is the resolution of the trajectory data. So we can get up to 0.1 second, which is helpful for us to test our model. So we get only 10% of the vehicles, so as a sampled data, because we know that we cannot get 100% in reality. And we got the data from 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. with 2 peaks and so on. So we run the analysis on the data, and we found that time, distance, and speed of the slowed down vehicles is related to the queue length and traffic volume. As you can see in this graph, when we have longer queue, then the speed of the slowed down vehicles get higher too. And from that, we got an indication that we can use the slowed down vehicles in our model, and it should give us the better estimation. So we run the model and using 33 cycles of the day. And as you can see here, in solid black, this is the traffic volume or the ground truth that we had. And the dashed line is our estimation model, how it performed. And also here, this is the cycle length, sorry, the queue length in the cycle itself. So the bottom line, we found a good accuracy of 88% with low market penetration rate. And the minimum accuracy was 72% with MAPE of 27, which is the main absolute percentage error. And then the maximum accuracy in some cycles was 99%. And previous model can achieve an accuracy around 88 only with very high market penetration rate, like 40% or 50%. So what we tested also is the effect of market penetration rate. So as you can see here, we started with 5% up to 20%. And we could see that there is a big difference between the 5 and 10, that when we moved from 5 to 10, we got improvement in the accuracy, like here. But from 10 to 20, the difference wasn't that huge, but there's still some difference. So the accuracy of 20%, as you can see here, it's like 92%, while we found it with the 10% to be 88. So our conclusion here is that there is a relationship between the slowed down vehicles and the last queued vehicles when we look at it from dissipation shockwave point of view, and by using the shockwave analysis. Also, with lower market penetration rate, our model achieved a good accuracy of 88%. When in future, if we get better market penetration rate of 20%, we expect that to get 93% of accuracy. So this is the end of my presentation. If you have any question, please feel free to ask.
Awesome. Yeah, thank you, Majeed. I'm glad you can able to share your research with us here. There is one question in the chat that I'll read right now. So it says, the market share percent estimates by 2024 in slide 7 look higher than I would expect. Do you know what the definition of a CV represented in that number is? Is it cars that have cellular network capability only, or is it a car that talks to the infrastructure, or is it infrastructure around the country are already capable of supporting this?
Yeah, that's actually a good question. I mean, it's very hard to get an answer about the market penetration rate. How is it exactly? Because there are many different car companies. There are many different source of data. So in this one exactly, this is based on the connected vehicles that's able to communicate, which is right now in the market. I cited the study that I got the number from, but answering your question, it is based on the connected vehicles that has the ability to communicate with infrastructure.
Awesome. Thanks again, Majeed. And then with that, I'll pass it over to Adam for our last presentation.
All right. Have the pleasure of introducing Dr. Shanjiang Zhu, who is an associate professor of transportation planning and engineering at George Mason University. He graduated from Tsinghua University, Beijing, China, with a BS degree in 2003 and MS in 2005. From 2001 to 2003, he studied at the École Centrale de Nantes in France. As a dual degree student, he obtained his PhD degree at the University of Minnesota, Twin Cities, in 2010, and worked 2 years as a research scientist at the University of Maryland before joining GMU. Dr. Zhu has more than 17 years of research experience in areas including travel demand modeling, travel behavior analysis, traffic simulation, transportation data analytics, analysis of non-motorized traffic and infrastructure needs, and transportation economics. His research work has also been funded by USDOT, FHWA, NSF, VDOT, and DDOT. He is Virginia Governor appointee on the Technical Advisory Board of Northern Virginia Transportation Authority and is a fellow of GMU P3 Transportation Policy Center. Dr. Zhu is a recipient of 2014 Young Researcher of the Year Award of the International Transport Forum, the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development. Topic of the presentation, as you can see, is value of time distribution, value of time estimation based on data for the I-66 corridor and implication for behavior reaction tolls. Floor is yours.
Thank you. Can everyone hear me and see my slides?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, thank you, Adam, for the introduction, and it's my pleasure to join the SimCap program. So as you can see, the title is about value of time using data from the I-66 corridor. This is a joint work with Dr. Majeed and Dr. Hong Yang from ODU, Dr. Oakley Sahin from Argonne National Lab, and my student at George Mason University. Most of the work are summarized in 2 papers. One was published as Transport Research Record, and the other was submitted to Transport Policy. And we also want to thank VDOT for supporting this study. So although this work was actually motivated by developing a model for the corridor, it has broader implication. As you can see from the figure here, over the past 20 plus years, the number of express toll lanes with dynamic pricing schemes actually increased very rapidly. People are hoping the express toll lanes could serve as effective travel demand management tools in addition to its role in funding transportation infrastructure. So on this table, you can see, maybe it's too tiny, but you can see the number of express toll lane facilities in different states, their minimal toll level on average, the maximum toll level on average, if it exists, their discounting policy for HOV2, HOV3, their discounting policy for transit vehicles, and also for trucks and for clean energy vehicles. So you can see express toll lanes could also help to promote high vehicle occupancy, green vehicles, public transit, etc. To evaluate those facilities and to evaluate the toll policies, value of time is a key parameter, as we all know. So we are going to look at this problem from locally collected data. Also, we are trying to inform the debate between the Lexus lanes versus the option lanes. So some people believe the express toll lanes only benefit people with higher income, and others believe the user base is broader. So we are going to look at that problem here using locally collected data. The reason was, if you look at the literature, there are very few examples of empirical studies on the value of time distribution among express toll lanes users. Here we list a few examples, for example, based on the I-394 MinPass program in Twin Cities, Minnesota, I-15 in San Diego, California, in Atlanta, Georgia, in Washington State, and 2 more examples in Texas. If you look at the range of the value of time estimation that was done empirically, it goes from 20 plus dollar per hour to more than $100 per hour. So the range is huge. There's really no consensus in the literature about the value of time distribution. Also, only 2 studies look at the frequent versus non-frequent users. And one conclude the non-frequent users has higher value of time. The others say there's no significant difference. So that makes us feel there is a need to really look at this problem using locally collected data. So the objective for this study is really to look at the ETL usage by vehicle, by occupancy, by frequent versus non-frequent users, and by different time of day. We also want to empirically estimate the value of time using locally collected data, which was based on the I-66 in Seattle Beltway corridor between March 2018 to May 2018. So it includes 64 weekdays during which the toll were collected. And we also has the INRIX data to inform the travel time along the corridor. There are many combinations of entrance and exits along the corridor, and in order to avoid certain kind of confounding factors, we decide to use the longest possible routes. So people going from the interchange with I-495 all the way to the DC line. And we look at the data also include the trip type, high occupancy vehicle trips versus single occupancy vehicle trips. SUV pays tolls and HOV do not. We also look at entry and exit timestamps, which allow us to compare that with INRIX data, so we can look at the travel time along alternative corridors. We know exactly how much toll was paid, and we also have an anonymized identifier, which we can use to track trips across the entire 3 months time period. So with that, first we can look at how frequent people are using the corridor. So I don't know if you can see this clearly, maybe the font is too tiny. So on the upper left, you have the HOV users eastbound, so during the morning peak. On the upper right, you have SOV single occupancy trips. The y-axis represents a number of unique users, and the x-axis represents the number of days we see that trips. So we decide to define the frequent users as people who use this corridor at least once per week. So that's 12 weekdays during the 3 months time period we observe. Among the single occupancy vehicles, so people who pay the tolls, 94% of them use it less than once per week. So if you look at that tiny yellow vertical line, that is the cutoff points. 94% of them actually use it less than once per week. Many of them, around 60 plus of them, actually use it only once during that 3 months time period. So only very few users actually use it regularly as a commuter. If you look at the westbound, the number is even lower. 97% of them use it less than once per week, and 70 plus of them use it only once during the 3 months time period we observed. The percentage was slightly higher for high occupancy vehicles, so because they do not pay tolls, and we would expect them to use it more frequently. So the next, we want to look at the time of day distribution. So here you can see on the upper level, you have eastbound results, and on the lower half, you have westbound results. The blue line represents the time of day distribution for frequent users, and the red line represents time of day distribution for the non-frequent users. On the left, again, you have HOV users who don't pay tolls. So the distribution here, or the departure time pattern here, is closer to the real preference for departure time. And if you look at the departure time for single occupancy vehicles who has to pay the toll, they are skewed leftwards, meaning many of them departed much earlier than what they would otherwise prefer to be. But for the non-frequent users, the shift is not that straightforward, not very obvious. If you look at the afternoon peak period, you also observe a slightly shift to the early hours when people will pay lower tolls, but the shift is not as strong as the morning peak period. So that is some quick observations of the data. Next, we want to ask who pay higher tolls, frequent users or non-frequent users. We got the answer from our earlier analysis, but here we plot the percentage of frequent versus non-frequent users along y-axis, and the x-axis is the actual toll paid, going from $0 to as high as $48. So as you can see, non-frequent users really pay much higher tolls during the morning peak period, and during the afternoon peak period, the difference is still significant, but it's more stable. So for example, as the toll value increases during the morning peak for the eastbound, when toll goes above $30, almost 75% of those who pay are non-frequent users. So we would expect a very long tail in value time distribution. There are certain group of users who really don't care about the high tolls, or they really have a trip of a higher value they must complete. And this implies the frequent users are more sensitive to tolls, and they are trying to avoid paying higher tolls by switching departure time, switching to carpooling, or taking other modes. So next, we want to do this numerically. So we want first compute the time savings they would achieve by using the I-68 corridor. So we compare them, the travel time along the corridor, with those users who traveled along US 29 and US 50 using the INRIX data. Here we use the real travel time, not instantaneous travel time. So we really track segment by segment how much time they spend on each segment and when they arrive at the next segment. So add the travel time as they progress along the corridor. And we compute the difference in travel time, so the travel time savings, and divide the tolls by the travel time savings. That's how we define value time in this case. And as you can see here, we first present the results for the morning peak. And you can see on your left, you have frequent users. On your right, you have non-frequent users. As expected, the non-frequent users pay a much higher tolls. On average, it's $62 per hour for the time they saved. And the frequent users pay on average $45 per hour for the time they saved. And here, all the white areas are actually the distribution. You can see there are two peaks, which we didn't really have a good explanation, but the empirical data show two peaks for both the frequent users and the non-frequent users. On average, the non-frequent users pay 36% higher in terms of how much they pay for the same time savings. For the afternoon peak, those two peaks disappear. So we see a single peak, and the patterns for the frequent users and the non-frequent users look quite similar. On average, they pay around $38 per hour for the time to be saved. So this is the value time we estimated for the users who travel along the corridor, but we also have users who travel on parallel arterial streets. So in order to estimate the value time distribution for all the users along the corridor, we have to adopt a weighted average approach. So we look at the number of trips crossing the lines we draw, and some of them use the I-66 instead of Beltway corridor. Some of them use the US 50 and US 29, and on average, we have $30.5 per hour value of time for the AM peak, and the number is lower for the afternoon peak. For people who didn't pay the toll, we used the MWCOG planning model value of time assumption, so which is $24 for the morning peak and $20 per hour for the afternoon peak. But once we estimated this, we may ask, will the value of time change over time, and how do we know if it has been changed? If we have to go through the exercise again and again, it takes a lot of time. So we really want to develop a quick diagnosis method to see if the value of time has been changed. So how do we do that? Actually, through the modeling process, we found the overall travel demand and the value of time distribution are the two most important factors that would affect the usage of the express toll lanes. And their impact would be different. So if the demand increased across the board, then that would increase the usage of both the shoulder hours and the peak hours of the express toll lanes. And also it would increase the demand for the general purpose lanes. But if it's not because of overall demand change, but only the value of time has been changed, then we would expect different signs for the peak hours and the shoulder hours, and also different signs in the demand change for the peak hours and the general purpose lane usage. So basically, the express toll lanes pull users from shoulder hours and from the general purpose lanes. So how do we evaluate the demand change over time? We know the number of users is proprietary for many like P3 projects, so we cannot know that. But since most express toll lanes are not congested, so the demand is in proportion approximately to density, and density is the single most important factor that drives the toll price. So we can use the toll price as a surrogate measure to look at the demand change. So if toll increases, if the demand increases, then the toll level increases. So the pandemic, the COVID-19 pandemic, provided a natural experiment that allow us to test this assumption. So here we compare the demand between 2019 and 2020 along I-66 inside the Beltway corridor. To your left, when you have blue bar, those are for the morning peak, and the green bar are for the afternoon peak. Here are the whisker box plots. So we show not only the mean, but also the distribution, like a 90th percentile and 10th percentile. So you can see in 2020, the demand dropped significantly. And in 2021, it rebounded a little bit, but still much lower than what we saw in 2019. And even in 2022, it's still lower than what you saw in 2019 along I-66. Here, for the morning peak, we have a confounding factor because the capacity has been changed. We added one more lane for the eastbound corridor. So keep that in mind. With the whisker box plots, we have not only the mean, but also distribution, which allow us to do like a statistical test. This number is too tiny. But basically, the message here is, if you look at the mean toll level between 2019 and 2020, 2021, 2022, those are numbers in the three columns. They're all negative, meaning the toll level is lower than what you had in 2019. And the last column show you significant level, so they are all significant. The shaded area represents the lowest drop. So for the morning peak, the lowest drop happened in 2021, and for the afternoon peak, the lowest drop, the highest drop, actually the lowest toll level appeared in 2020. So we are wondering if this is true for other express toll lanes in the region. So we also look at I-495. Here we compared the I-495 toll level between 2019 and 2022. And as you can see, they are more or less the same. And if you look at the statistical test, again, this may be too tiny on your screen, but basically the message is, when you compare 2022 and 2019 toll levels along 495, northbound and southbound. For the northbound, most of them are not significant. And for the southbound, some of them are significant, but others are not. So in terms of the conclusion, using the empirical data, this study shows that most ETL users are non-frequent users and only use them for trips of higher value. Frequent and non-frequent users exhibit different departure time patterns using HOV departure time as a reference. And frequent and non-frequent users show very different level of value of time, with non-frequent users less sensitive to high tolls, so you see a long tail in their value of time distribution. VOT has a huge impact on the performance of ETLs, and it's possible to evaluate potential change statistically under certain assumptions. So we just demonstrated that using the data from I-66 and I-495. Okay, with that, I will open the floor for questions.
Great, thank you very much. That was very, very informative. Got two questions in the chat. The first is on I-66 PM. Why did non-frequent users pay less than frequent users?
I believe non-frequent users still pay more, but they are not statistically significant. So yeah, I mean, frequent users here number is slightly higher for mean, but non-frequent users has a long tail, but statistically they are not very different, only $1 apart or less than $1 apart.
The next question is, did you consider the difference between business trips and personal trips?
We suspect the reason we have very like with trips of really high value time is because some of them are business trips, but with the data we have, there's no way for us to differentiate different vehicle types. We have no information about the demographics and etc. We only have an anonymized identifier, which allow us to track the vehicles, but not the people, the drivers.
Great. Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much. Oliver, I can pass it back to you to close us out unless there's any other comments. You're muted.
Sorry, is on mute there. Yeah, thanks everyone, all 4 presenters and everyone for joining this meeting today. Just a couple of quick notes here. So you may have noticed the meeting was been recorded. So we will be posting it on our WDCSITE or CAPSITE YouTube page, most likely near the end of summer or early fall for everyone to view again. And then for those of you who attended who are here, we will be sending the PDH instructions. The meeting has been approved for 1.5 PDHs. So keep an eye out for that in the near future to redeem those PDH credits. And then, as mentioned in the chat, we will request the presenters to see if these presentation slides can be shared, which so we'll do that per request. With that, yeah, I'll give you guys 3 minutes back of your time. Again, thank you for the presenters and thank you all for joining today. Have a good rest of your day.